Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad that you could be with me today, and I'm very excited about this episode of the podcast because I've got a very, very special guest with us today, and his name is Garrett Jonsson. So, hey Garrett, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad that you're here with me, and I'm very excited about your story. I heard about you and learned about you and kind of your vision and heart and some pretty unique things that you've done and that you're doing. And I immediately thought, man, I would love to have Garrett on my podcast as a guest. So I really appreciate your willingness to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that we crossed paths. It was I don't think it was by chance that I met your wife in Missouri. So I'm glad we crossed paths.
Right. Awesome. So, guys, let me just say a few words to just kind of frame a little bit about Garrett, and then I'm going to ask him some questions and turn him loose, and we're going to hear a little bit about his story and his journey of sexual purity and his struggle with pornography and some different things that have been going on in his heart and life. But Garrett, like most of us, growing up, he was exposed to pornography at a pretty young age, and it affected him, and it followed him for years and years and years, even on into his marriage. And later, as he was really struggling with this through a series of events, some powerful things happened in his heart and life, and he came to the place where he decided to do a couple pretty extravagant expressions to make a statement about pornography. So he did this thing called 30 in 30, and he did 30 marathons in 30 days with his hands handcuffed. And then after that, he did a coast-to-coast bike ride, literally across the country from Yorktown, Virginia to San Francisco, California. And he rode his bike 3,800 miles. It took 56 days. He covered 9 states. He drugged 7 big chains with him behind his bike on this bike ride. And it all was representing one fight. So it's a pretty amazing story. And let me just say, Garrett, that these are pretty extravagant, radical expressions of you doing these exercises to bring awareness to this issue of pornography. So where would you start with your story? How in the world did you decide to do this?
So I like that you call them extravagant expressions, and I've never heard that term or have it put that way. And I really like that because my whole goal in doing these was to create catharsis for people that have these repressed emotions. And so the goal was to change the conversation. It was to start conversations. It was to let people know that good people struggle with this stuff and that you can move forward with your life. So just trying to make all these different statements be seen.
Awesome. And just kind of, it feels like you just really wanted to kind of bring awareness to the issue of pornography and convey to people that, hey, there's help available. We can fight against this thing and we can learn to experience our sexual selves in a healthier way. There's some options out there. So maybe I could just ask you about your story, Garrett. And by the way, let me just say to our audience for a minute, I normally record in my studio by myself, and when I do an interview like this, I'm recording it on Skype. And when we do this, it just isn't quite the same quality as the studio, so just bear with us, but I promise, even if the quality isn't quite what it typically is, I promise the content of the conversation, I think, is really going to be worth listening to. So, Garrett, let me just ask you, concerning your story, where would you begin? How did pornography affect your life? How did pornography come into your life originally?
So, when I was 9 years old, I was having a sleepover with some football buddies, and that night was the first night that I viewed pornography. It just came up, and I didn't know it then, but it was going to be the beginning of a challenge. So that's when I was first exposed to it.
A challenge that probably would follow you for years and years to come, like it does for many of us.
Absolutely. When I was 9, so about 21 years is what it's been.
I see. When you say it came up, presumably, I mean, you're quite a bit younger than I am. I'm 59 at the time that we're recording this. So presumably the guys were looking on the internet and somebody pulled something up and you guys found this stuff on the internet?
So it was actually on HBO.
I see.
The internet wasn't popular when I was 9 years old.
Okay.
I was born in 1986. So that would put it at 95.
I see.
It's about the first time I saw it.
Okay.
So it was in one of the premium channels, like HBO or Showtime.
I see. Oh, by the way, I understand that statistically, the average age is 11 years old. 10 or 11 years old is the average age that boys start looking at pornography in America. I found my dad's porn when I was a boy. I think I was 10 years old. So 9 is pretty young, and it's really a shame. But do you remember how it affected you? Can you remember the feelings it provoked in you, or the thoughts, or did you feel
absolutely.
Did you feel confused, or what did it provoke in you as a 9-year-old boy?
As a 9-year-old, I had heard things. I knew I had never seen it, but I had talked about it with friends, people on the playground and whatnot. When I first saw it, it was something that the release of those feel-good chemicals. And I was a little bit confused because it was like, it felt good, it felt right, but it also felt wrong at the same exact time.
Right. Which I can only imagine is a mechanism of the human conscience, that, you know, we have a conscience, and probably as a young boy, there was a kind of innocence about your heart and life, and somehow your conscience was informing you, and you intuitively knew there's something wrong about this. I should not be doing this.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then in the days that followed, you know, how did it affect you? Was it like an avalanche? I mean, it provoked something in you, or lit something like a blaze, and then you were just hungry to keep seeking it out and look. Once you knew it was there, did you keep going back?
So I didn't have access to pornography. My parents, we didn't have the premium channels. My father didn't look at pornography. He didn't have pornography in the home. So I didn't have access to it. We didn't have the internet. So I had to go off of those images that were so ingrained in my mind.
Wow.
Which for a while. And then once I became the age of 12 is when I would be able to, that's when I was able to get access to more pornography.
I see. And then how steady or how intense was your involvement once you discovered it? Was it like every day, hours a day, several times a week?
No, it would go in spurts. As a younger adolescent, from 12 to 16, it was once a week, twice a week. I would masturbate more often, but viewing actual pornography was lesser amount, just because I didn't have access to it.
Right.
I didn't want to bring in my home because I didn't want my parents to find out, and so I'd go a lot off of memory. Oh, I was going to say, I think from my perspective, where pornography really becomes a drug or is really, really harmful is in 2007. I just kind of use that as the year because that's when the iPhone was released. Also, in that same year, 2007, it's when one of the main or major pornographic websites was also founded in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's a year where things began to get really, really...
a kind of explosion.
Harmful, exactly.
You know, one of the things that I talk about, Garrett, a little bit, I mentioned earlier that I'm 59 at the time we're recording this, and I don't use pornography. It hasn't been a part of my life on a regular basis or anything for years and years and years. And if I was involved with pornography on a regular basis or every couple days or using pornography several times a week, statistically 68% of Christian men view porn on a regular basis. And a regular basis means several times a week to at least one time a month. But my point is, I couldn't handle it as an adult, grown Christian man. I can't imagine how destructive it would be to me, how it would mess up my equilibrium in my own heart, my conscience, as you reflected on, in my relationship with God, my relationship with my wife, the lust that it would provoke in me. I'm telling you, I couldn't handle it as a 59-year-old man, and you're telling me that you're going to put this stuff on a 9-year-old boy? Are you kidding me? A 9-year-old, 10, 11, 12-year-old boy? So if you had to put words to it, how do you think pornography affects a boy in harmful ways?
So they call it an adult industry, but it's not an adult industry because of the accessibility. And the harm that it has on the young kids is tremendous, because that's one reason why I hate the porn industry, is because it targets children.
Right.
And the reason why they target them is because they're susceptible, their brains haven't developed yet, they don't know what intimacy is. I think subconsciously they know, just like you said, that where that light inside of you, you know right from wrong when you see it. But they don't know what intimacy is. They haven't been intimate with someone. And so it really distorts their views on intimacy. Right.
Yeah, I think that it's way underestimated. I think there's this attitude that a lot of people have that looking at porn is no big deal. It's part of being an American. Every boy looks at porn, you know. It's part of growing up. It's part of becoming a man. It's part of masculinity. And I know so many men that literally, I knew one man, his uncle literally took him to a prostitute to have sex for the first time on his 13th birthday. He said, I'm going to show you what it means to be a man. And a lot of dads and brothers and uncles and cousins, they literally introduce their boys to pornography with this kind of macho concept. We're going to make you into a man. And I think that it's really a deception, because I don't think that people understand how destructive pornography is to a young boy, how it distorts his understanding of sexuality and intimacy and the way he's going to look at women, and the way it provokes lust in him, and just all these devastating consequences that come to bear in a boy's heart and life.
We're just scraping the surface on the consequences.
Right.
But I think that if you look at our history, we've made similar mistakes in our history. And a couple examples are with cocaine. In the 1800s, cocaine was thought to be an excellent cure for many illnesses, and doctors would prescribe it for toothaches. And it wasn't until science caught up with truth that we know that cocaine is harmful and very addictive.
Right.
And similar things happened with tobacco, where doctors would prescribe tobacco because it soothes the nerves, or they even said it clears the lungs.
Wow.
At one point. And so that's the thing that I'm seeing, is that we're having to learn the lesson the hard way, just as we did with other substances like alcohol, tobacco. And it's not until science catches up with truth. Once science catches up with truth, at that point, that's when we all jump on board.
Right. I like that. I've never heard it put that way. Science catching up with truth. That's awesome. And of course, with a spiritual orientation, we understand that God is truth and God's word is truth, and what God says is always true. And so we've got to catch up with God's understanding and viewpoint and opinion on these things.
Right.
So let me ask you this, Garrett. Where do we go from here in your story? So this is kind of your introduction, 9, 10, 12 years old. I saw on your website, I think you talk about struggling with porn for 20 years, 21, 22 years in your life.
Right. Yeah, no one knew. No one knew that I looked at porn. The crazy thing is that because like we talked about earlier, where in today's day and age, guys will say this is going to make a man out of you. They're openly talking about pornography. Where me, I did not do that. I never, not even my best friends, not my football buddies, not my family, not my mom or dad. Nobody knew about my struggles with pornography.
And why would you? Why were you so careful to hide it?
Because I didn't want to be looked down on. I didn't want to let people know that I was having a challenge.
Right. I guess it goes all the way back to that issue when you were 9 years old, that your conscience was informing you, this is wrong. I know I shouldn't be doing this. If people knew that I was doing this, they would disapprove. So it's kind of like an intuitive sense of shame. So
Exactly.
Porn provokes this tendency towards secrecy and hiding and duplicity.
Absolutely. One of the chains that I dragged across the United States on my journey coast to coast were the chains of secrecy.
Right.
So each chain represented an aspect of pornography that keeps people stuck, and one of them is secrecy. So I think you hit it right on that is one of the main struggles that people have.
Right. I saw that you drug 7 chains behind your bike, and I've got the 7 chains. I was going to ask you about that here in a little bit when we get to that part, if that's okay.
Right.
So,
yeah,
so for 20 years, you're living in this kind of duplicity. There's 2 Garretts. There's the public Garrett that your family knows, people at your church know, your friends know, and then there's the secret Garrett that has this issue going on in his heart and life. So really there's a duplicity. There's 2 Garretts, and this goes on for like 20 years.
Mm-hmm, correct.
And I saw on your website that you thought to yourself, I think what so many guys think, when I get married, my problem with porn will go away.
Right. Yeah, I definitely had that thought.
And how'd that work out for you? Did your marriage fix your problem?
Yeah, the thing is that it's built into. There's a reason why people struggle with this stuff, and the reason why is because it's addictive.
Right.
And if you stop and think, like, what is addiction? What makes someone go back to a substance they don't like? What forces them to do that? And it's all up in the brain. It's all up in the reward pathway. And so for me, it was, I couldn't get out of it. To answer your question regarding when I went into marriage, it was still in my reward pathway. It was still built in there where it's like, well, you're feeling stress, let's release some feel good chemicals, or you're feeling down, like let's do it, or let's view it and get that release of the dopamine, oxytocin, and all those chemicals. And that's what happened. Is I set these goals over and over and over of, okay, let's stop, never again, never ever again. And then you go back to it. And then I'd go through periods of time where it's like I just would accept that I was never going to get over it. And so I would just openly do it, openly view it.
Just kind of give up, or what I say, relinquish yourself to it. And now you're not even in the battle. You're not even fighting against it. You've just kind of given yourself over to it because you figure I'm going to do it anyway. So what's the difference?
Yeah, right.
So this goes on for 20 years, and it literally follows you into your marriage then, and you're thinking, when I get married, marriage will solve my problem. So how did that part of it look? How did it follow you into the marriage, and how long did it follow you into the marriage?
I was still under that. I still had that chains of secrecy, so my wife didn't know that I had a challenge with pornography. And it followed me in, and because I carried it around in my pocket. Everyone has access to it in their phone. And I would go back to it, and from time to time, and I never told Ariel. We went through 5.5 years of marriage. I know we went through 5 years of marriage before I told her.
I see. And you never did actually get caught by her. You came to the place in your heart and life where you decided to actually disclose to her your struggle and your issue and your problem.
Right. I never got caught. That's one reason why this is such a challenge today, is that in regards to the body, like, it doesn't make your teeth turn yellow, it doesn't make your hair fall out, it doesn't have these dramatic symptoms that other drugs do. And so it's easier to hide. And my wife didn't know.
Wow.
And I would use it multiple times per week. She had no clue.
Wow. So how would you say you came about to the place where you were convicted enough that you knew in your heart, I've got to disclose this to Ariel? That must have been a really intense battle for you. And by the way, I can relate to it a little bit, because I had this gigantic duplicity going on in my heart and life for years and years in my marriage, and I never really did get caught by my wife either, and I came to the place where I disclosed everything to my wife, and I was scared to death to come into the light, to admit the truth to her, because I didn't quite know how she was going to respond and what the consequences were going to be. So what brought you to the place where you knew, this is it, I've got to tell my wife?
For me, what happened was I got to the point where I was so fed up with going back to it over and over, and the depression and the sadness and all the negative thoughts that come along with it. They just got to the point where I was so sick of it. I couldn't tolerate it anymore.
Right.
And another thing that really helped me was I was able to view a seminar, and it was really a blessing to be at that seminar, because my wife and I attended this seminar together. We were not aware that this seminar was going to happen, but it happened. It was about pornography. Wow. And my wife and I sat through this seminar together, but she did not know that I had a challenge with it yet at that time.
And this thing's hitting you like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm. And so that seminar also was a big blessing in my life and a big reason as to why I decided to speak up about it.
That sounds like what I might call a divine appointment. It's almost like God was saying, "Okay, dude, I've had about enough of this nonsense, and I'm gonna ring your bell here, and it's time to bring this out in the open, and we're gonna start dealing with some issues, and we're gonna start healing your life." So, how soon did you tell your wife after that seminar?
What I wanted to do was I wanted to get a couple months without viewing it before I told her. So 2 months after the seminar, I had gone 2 months without viewing it, and that's when I decided to tell her the truth finally.
And in that way, you were able to report a little cushion of victory there, which I'm sure would inspire a little bit of hope in her heart.
Yeah, I don't know if I would give that advice, though. I mean, everyone's journey is different, but if someone's listening and they're looking for advice of when should I tell, how should I tell, I think that the answer is the sooner the better.
Right.
And I wouldn't advise people to try to get some under their belt before they tell, because it's usually doesn't happen.
Right, and it's just delaying, postponing the inevitable. And for those that are familiar with my podcast and my teaching, and those that have been following me through my podcast, you guys know that I advocate very much this concept of coming into the light. I did a series of episodes called The Sexual Alliance, and in that series of episodes, I very much advocate coming into the light with your wife and making a complete, total, honest disclosure to your wife who you really are, who you are as a sexual man, the things you've been doing, the struggles that you have, and then moving forward from there. And I know that it's a profoundly difficult thing to do, but I believe it's a profoundly redemptive thing to do, and it gives God something to work with that God can bless and use in a powerful way, not only in your heart and life, but then also in the marriage. So maybe one more question before we wrap up this first part one of this episode with Garrett Jonsson. And Garrett, I wanted to ask you, so how did Ariel respond? Here you've been married for 5 years, 5.5 years, and you make this disclosure to her. Was it like an atomic bomb going off in the middle of your marriage? Was she shocked? Was she horrified? Did she scream? Did she want to throw you out of the house? How did it go down?
So the way I went about it was, once again, not the best way. What I did was I waited. We were getting ready for bed, and we were both laying in bed. And usually when I am going to sleep, I lay on my stomach, and I have this certain position that I try to get into to get comfortable. And that night, I just laid straight on my back, and I was looking straight up at the ceiling. And my wife quickly realized that I wasn't getting into my usual comfort position, and she questioned, like, what's the matter?
Something's up.
Something's up, and the lights were off. It was dark in there, and I stayed silent for about 3 minutes, and then she started questioning what was going on. And then I told her, and she went silent. She was hurt. She felt betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't yell at that point.
In my estimation, rightfully so, that she would have these thoughts and feelings and a sense of betrayal, trust being broken.
Absolutely. Betrayal trauma is real. And she definitely experienced betrayal trauma. So that was one of the biggest hurdles to get over, is knowing that you're going to tell the truth even though it hurts.
Right. And how long would you say that was the recovery process? I'm sure that in one sense, you guys, it's a journey that we'll walk until the day we die and go to heaven. But how long did you guys go into a process of counseling then? Was it weeks? Was it months? Was it years for you guys to kind of work through this stuff?
So once again, our situation is really unorthodox and probably isn't the best to follow, but we actually didn't go to counseling. We went to one session of counseling, and we didn't like it. And since then, we've done it ourselves. And to answer your question about how long it's been to recover, is I think there's a lot of trust now with her.
Awesome.
And towards me, so that's great. I would say that although I'm still tempted to view pornography sometimes, I'd say that I'm near full recovery, although I am still tempted sometimes.
Well, I can relate to that, and I think the encouraging thing about that is that Jesus himself was tempted. I don't think it's a sin to be tempted. Right. The issue is learning to manage that temptation in a healthy way and to make quality decisions. And with that being
that's a great point.
With that being said, you guys, I see from the clock that we're out of time for this episode. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode, part one, with Garrett Jonsson. So Garrett, thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And
it was fun.
We'll look forward to having you back for part two next week. So guys, I really encourage you to come back, and we're going to get more into Garrett's story and kind of where he goes from here and how he gets into these extravagant expressions to fight against pornography. 30 marathons in 30 days in handcuffs. Holy cow, are you kidding me? I couldn't I'm not sure I could run one marathon in 30 days, let alone 30 marathons in 30 days, and then his coast-to-coast bike ride. So I'm excited to hear more about that. So God bless you guys. Thanks for being with us today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.